Please welcome our first reader, Ellen Cranitch.
Thank you very much, Sean. Words. From the throat of the sky, quick, look, briefly it's manifest, the tumbling snowflake, its dendrites of ice, its flawless symmetry. Words can proliferate just as suddenly. Think of how that verbal crystal ice can multiply, how it packs into malice its cold, vengeful heart. It brings the word closer to the reality. There is an intensity in a word's desire to become experience. Concentrate hard. You might just be able to feel it. The elastic reach of language as it strives for exactitude, as it attempts to become, not merely to represent. Well, it's a real honor to be here at the Ledbury Poetry Festival and to be sharing a platform with Sean and with Isabelle. And thank you all very much for coming out. I just wanted to say something about the collection. This collection is inspired by real life, by the experience of discovering that my partner was a crystal meth addict. There's quite a lot of literature out there which is written from the point of view of the addict. This is written from the point of view of the partner, and that's a perspective I found is far less commonly represented. The narrative traces a period of several years, and it begins in the period before knowing he's a drug addict, then it deals with revelations, and then the immediate aftermath. So the next poem I'm going to read is called Struceen. Struceen is a mountain in the southwest of Ireland in County Kerry. It overlooks a desolate valley. Struceen. Where does it come from, the strung-out cry of the mountain's name? The car has come past. It is holding its course, probing its way through the light-starved interior. Loops of mist puzzle the headlamps, wrestle the beam as the car pushes through on the single road through the dark valley. Is it her imagination, or, as the car picks up speed, do the flanks of the mountains edge closer? Do they crowd its grey exterior? Flashes of black, wet black, the black valley's black water, ropes of anguish, headstrong the river, bridles, fretful, thrashes its mane, rises up, channels a voice to protest, only to crash, fall, break on unforgiving rock. The passenger, she, is strapped in. Something had caused her to hesitate before placing the metal plate in the red buckle. He had started to drive faster, faster. He had started to speak slower, slower, his tone level, like the road. Immaculate, his honed aggression. With the speed, the verbal assaults intensify. Terror takes hold of her. She digs her fingers into the seat. There is nowhere to go. A mind can be placed in the vice of another mind and the screw tightened at the same time as a personality is prized apart. The road's wetter, closer to the water. As he hits the brake, the car comes to a halt. She feels a jarring pressure, the strap against her chest. Her spirit breaks like surf against the belt. Thank you. The stars. He has come in and crashed out, half-dressed, on the living room sofa. It is 48 hours before he wakes. I discover later this is the hypersomnia which follows a binge of sex and drugs. Since Dan returned to university, I've taken to sleeping in his attic bedroom. I go there now, pull the cold duvet around me, turn my face towards the shuttered Velux window. They shine back at me, the luminous constellations. When Dan was small, I remember how carefully he'd peel the paper backing from each rigid plastic star and position it on the ceiling, creating his own celestial nightscape. They shine back at me, Dan's stars. The next poem I'm going to read is called Actaeon. Actaeon is, of course, a figure from classical mythology, from Ovid's Metamorphoses. He's a hunter, and his story is that he's out in the forest one day hunting deer with his dogs, and he comes across the goddess Diana, who is also a hunter. She's bathing naked. He catches sight of her, which is an utter violation, so she curses him by turning him into a stag. He tries to call out to his dogs, all of whom he knows by name, but all he finds he has is the strangled sounds of a deer. He's lost his human voice. They don't recognize him, they leap on him, and they devour him. My poem, Actaeon, which is about loss of voice, traces the transition of Actaeon from man to stag. Actaeon. All that he knows he is, his sense of self, knelt. He lowers his life, his long-stemmed stag's limbs. Around him, the forest floor. Above, a mauve scent, chalk blue elderberries. He tries to reach, but can't. The dog's bloody teeth in his hide, on his neck, dragging it down. His tongue, useless, a root. The light in his eyes, fading now, a dumb plea. A last time he tries to lift up his head and feels the airy scaffold, the pure braced weight of bone, the wonder of the branching concave crown. The entire antler edifice move as one, and like an open hand, a hunter's glove, flare out to catch and hold an instant the human voice that she had taken from him. In the early days of his addiction, I didn't know what was going on, and the worst times could often be when we were away, perhaps because he didn't then have a supply of drugs. And on those occasions, his behavior could become very aggressive. Athens. We're in a hotel room off the city centre. Outside, homeless dogs roam the forecourt of an unopened Costa. Tinsel swings, catching splinters of thin winter light. In the distance, raucous voices of dock workers celebrate loudly, following a victory for Olympiakos. Suddenly, he is a different person. He tries to prevent me calling my children my brother. He says I am playing our sons off between us. He accuses me of being devious and says I am forcing him to have to control me. Where are they now, the words to hold me, to assuage? Poetry was very important during this period. This next poem is dedicated to the Greek poet Constantine Kafafi. It takes the form of a villanelle. I've always loved the villanelle because of the way its strict formal rules and the sheer quantity of refrains enable it to hold you in the present and keep the future at bay. To Kafafi. Dusk falls in a room of syntagma square. The shadows converge in the low winter light. Your words are her balm, may they come to her there. The lines from Kafafi recur like a prayer, pervading her mind when his anger ignites. Dusk falls in a room of syntagma square. A comb of pearls straightens the raven black hair of Sarpedon, dead, dark those eyes of jadeite. Your words are her balm, may they come to her there. Let tears of ambrosia temper the air. Sunbursts of tourmaline hold off the night. Dusk falls in a room of syntagma square. The rooms where you found love were shadow-filled, bare. Revived in your lines, they are legendary, bright. Your words are her balm, may they come to her there. The terror and hurt, the loss and despair can be wholly transformed. Words have that might. Dusk falls in a room of syntagma square. Your words are her balm, may they come to her there. Thank you. Trust. How many times did I ask him, are you using? How many times did he deny it when he was? He looks into my eyes as he lies. My eyes register the lie. His eyes register my disbelief. His eyes communicate his anger. At the perversity of this, my eyes express rage. We are trapped in the labyrinth of the gaze. As I began to talk to people about my experience, I found that a lot of people were very eager to give me advice, and some of that was very helpful, and some of that was much less so. So this next poem is called Reactions. You should fight to save your marriage. Translation, a failed marriage is shameful. Will you take him back? Translation, a relationship is something that can be given and withdrawn. Surely you knew. Translation, I am a liar. I am lying to this friend and to myself. Don't you think you were naive? Translation, no man can be trusted. Why couldn't you see that? You're in denial. Translation, I am refusing to confront what's going on. You should have an affair. Translation, an affair is the appropriate vengeful act. Bypass. Driving on the North Circular Road a cold March morning, the sky crash barrier grey. Adjacent in the car, there's a good chance we'll be attuned to the frayed edges of the other. There's a possibility of connection. Suddenly, his shoulders soften and relax. He rests his fingers more easily on the steering wheel. His eyes focus on some invisible horizon. It is as though he moves sideways out of his body, slips out of his frame. It is his out-of-body experience, but I am experiencing it. I didn't know it at the time, but this is the moment, after he had sworn that he was giving up, that he decides to use again. How did this moment articulate itself in his mind? Was it a conscious decision? Or was it entirely passive? a simple relaxation of tension, allowing the gates to open, the warmth to flood in. It wasn't a struggle in any sense that I could discern. It was the decision having been made. It was an expanding into a coveted and familiar consequence, like a deep and deeply satisfying exhalation of breath. Grey. A few years later, he told me that as he struggled to break free of addiction, his belief that my love was still there, I had said when he asked, "Is it over?" that I didn't know. "You didn't say it was over," he told me after, which meant everything. That possibility that I could still love him was what pulled him through and delivered him into recovery. I had said when he asked, "Is it over?" that I didn't know. At the time, that did not feel a position of strength, tentative, contingent, hampered by provisionality. At the time, perhaps the easier answer would have been to be more definitive, to say, yes, it is over. Yet I see now that had I adopted a more entrenched position, it would have significantly prescribed his response. It would have ruled out what in fact unfolded, a more nuanced kind of growth. And this next poem is about my two adult sons. If ever. If ever they were, I almost forget now, they are mine. The one in Paris on Rue Turgot, the other out west listening to Beach House. I conjure each voice as night falls, fold their names into boulevards and sunflowers. And I'll finish with just two more poems. My eldest son was traveling a lot during this period, the period that the book is written at. This next poem is called Tom. Tom, you are the blue that pools, bright as wet pebbles, in the inked letters on your bedroom wall. It does not fade, the blue felt tip on white wallpaper. You are a white falcon in blue air, the grace of its moves and its warm feathered heart. Its curving wingtips are the contours of your voice, that loved voice that comes to me from Tehran, from Tashkent, on the breath of the winds that divide us, the dry Scirocco, the dusty Shamal, which brings whispered hosannas of cypress and pine and the songs of the great sand seas. You are the depthless blue when light leaves the dunes, and I can hear the slightest starts and shivers of shifting sand as the mounds of glittering grains lift up their hems, studded with quartz dust and light, shake them out and resettle. You are ultramarine, the blue of ultimate things, of fierce risk, of a love that holds nothing back, that brings all of its faith to remote lands and strangers. And when you call me from Cairo, en route to Khartoum, you are the White Nile and you are the blue. Though I can't take your hand, I can still trace its movements in the words of Raymond Carver on your wall. I follow your touch in the curve of the B, in the light downstroke pressure of the L. I follow your truth in the word you chose always to have with you, which you give to me now, beloved. And the final poem is called December 1574. I think of them, Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross, their fingernails rimmed in dirt, trudging through the broken roads of a northern landscape under a night sky freighted with diamonds. Pulling their cloaks of coarse wool tight, they are bracing themselves against the sleet and ice of a Spanish winter. They are the odd couple, she 52, he just 25 when they meet. Both of Jewish extraction, they share a stubborn charisma, a reforming zeal. They are driven to expunge the corruption in the Carmelite order. Each will go on to be loved and admired, but also outcast, ridiculed, hounded, incarcerated, whipped. They will live one step ahead of the Inquisition. She had a vision of a crystal castle, a radiant sanctuary, the soul's dwelling place, deep within each of us. She wrote the interior castle in 1577 in Toledo. Inside the crystal castle are 7 chambers. Each marks a different stage in spiritual development. The outermost rooms contain evil spirits, vying to beat the traveller back. But a voice of infinite tenderness calls out to the pilgrim soul and persuades them to journey on. Further within, a keener apprehension, bright fragrances, the sweetness of meadow grass, the complex perfume of old roses, actuality of a different order. The journey ends at the innermost room, made entirely of crystal. Here, the pilgrim is reunited with their God. Life for the Spanish mystics is fundamentally the journey of the soul. Is it this conviction that creates in them so mesmeric a language of longing? The important thing is not to think much, but to love much. Saint Teresa of Avila. Thank you very much.
And so I'm just curious, how do you deal with representations of other people how do you deal with other representations of people who would be able to read this and be like, oh, I know you're talking about me. Like there's not really an artifice here.
I think it's a key question, a critical question that you have to confront. I think there's a tension between the kind of creative imperative to render experience authentically for the reader and the ethics of memoir, if you like. And there's a tension there. It has to work for the reader, but at the same time, I personally felt very exercised by referencing there are 3 living people referenced in my book, and it mattered to me absolutely that they were all behind its publication, 100%. I think people position themselves differently on that spectrum between that tension, but for me that was what mattered. I think that the strange thing was, why was my partner behind publication? And the reason is that he has been in recovery for a long time, so the events happened a long time ago, but also he talks about his own experience as a member of Narcotics Anonymous to his friends and family all the time. So the book doesn't function to reveal anything that he's not already owning and talking about. So I think those are the kinds of issues, but I think they're key issues, if you're writing about people, But the other thing to say is that poetry is an act of transformation. It's not the same as just writing a witness statement or something, Poetry has to use the resources of the poem, which is music and form and metaphor, to transform the experience that it's inspired by. And if it doesn't, that's what it has to start by doing. You're essentially trying to create a poem. So.
What argument do you feel you're making about your subject based on the ways you use your line breaks? What argument do you feel you're making about your subject based on the way you're using your line breaks? The question comes from, I think, that line breaks are expressive. They aren't just, poems are not just sentences that are broken, but we make an argument about where to stop speech or where speech should begin again each time. Isabelle's looking at me like, I knew you were going to ask something. So if you would just pontificate with me,
Okay,
what is it?
yeah.
What is it about your subject that demands perhaps your specific view of line breaks in the way that you've made them in the book?
So I use a lot of different forms. I use conventional forms like the villanelle, the ballad, the sonnet, and I use a lot of prose poems. Now, the prose poem doesn't operate according to the line unit. It overflows the line, like it goes according to the contour of the sentence. And I would arrive at those through having taken them through every other kind of form. And I would arrive at them when I had something to say that was freighted with thought, which had more abstract things in it. Because if you try putting that into the line unit, and it's not image rich, the line unit feels kind of a bit slack. So I found there were certain kinds of content, if you like, that suggested a kind of prose poem form, and other kinds, like the villanelle, which is essentially a staying in time, a stopping in time, and lots of repetition, which would need the exact, pentameter line unit sort of thing. So, but I don't think any of this is a particularly conscious process necessarily. I think it's a bit hit and miss. You arrive there, kind of thing. That's what I found. I don't know.
I want to ask about the second person, and the second person as opposed to, which I think goes back a little bit to this question of the question I was starting with, which is the other people in your work, right? So there's the other people, but then there's also the second person perspective, using the you, which is a kind of fluid perspective, or can be vague, can be deliberately vague, or it can be the speaker speaking, the artist speaking to themselves, or instructing someone else. And I just kind of wanted to, is there a kind of, what kind of reckonings, because both of you use you in the second person in your work, was there any kind of tension between when you went into that, and I won't say slipped because that makes it sound accidental, I'm assuming it was purposeful, but when you slip in, when you go into the second person, while you're also, I guess there's, is there a kind of philosophy you have when you're in there? Is that speaking to someone? Are you speaking to the self? Is there an actual you that stands outside, yourself that you were trying to, is it almost like getting closer to third? How do you think about not using the I, which you both also do in your work?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it brings it, on the most basic level, the address is intimate to you. So in my poem about my son Tom, you are, anaphora, it's sort of, but I think that, like the use of the I, there's kind of a world of ambiguities that you can use, and what you want to do is exactly what Isabelle said, you want to avoid creating confusion, kind of thing. But I think it's interesting. I found I also use third person sometimes. In the poem about the drive, I said the passenger, she. And, sometimes adopting these different distances from what you're writing about, or approaching the reader and they will have a different distance on it, is just kind of, in a way, one of the many resources you can use in the poem, But it's interesting,
I heard Salman Rushdie speak recently, and he said the closure he got was about his stabbing was from actually writing about it, not the actual trial and his attacker being given a life sentence. So my question to you both is, how important was the writing of these collections to you for processing what happened to you? I'm not going to dare say healing you, because that probably be too personal a question, but do you feel you had a choice whether or not to write these books?
I think there are different stages. So I think that you might, in the beginning of a very difficult experience, begin to write just to try and understand, to try and put things into words that are complicated, that you haven't experienced before. the decision to then use that raw material to take that into poetry is a kind of, for me anyway, a conscious decision. And it involves very much kind of transforming the experience and trying to arrive at something new that is hopefully memorable and resonant and kind of beautiful. So you move away from the impulse at the beginning, if you like, I think, to try and achieve closure. I don't think you ever set out to try and achieve closure. You might write to try and understand, but then there are so many stages beyond that of crafting the artifact in language, you know, but you know, it does take you somewhere, I think, like any piece of writing does, I think. I think also what comes to mind is something that Alice Oswald said once about the poem moves away from you, ultimately. It moves away from you. And that is the hallmark of its authenticity when it does that, when it becomes a sort of artifact in language that has kind of moved away from the experience that inspired it. It's just an interesting idea.
And what does moving away actually feel like when is it like, does it become not unrecognizable, but is it that it feel, what is that sense of newness or having the poem moved away from you? Sounds like also maybe the poem being done or finished or wanting to exist in a different space. What does that feel like for you to know that this is...
Yeah, I suppose that does touch on the idea of kind of closure or taking you through in some way, because metaphor is so important in poetry, and I think that, you know, when you're reading something that's densely metaphoric, as you're doing that, it's kind of in some sense transcending, you know, whatever it started as. So how does it feel? I think it's good to be inhabiting that alternate reality, if you like, you know.
It's a really simple question. Do you think in poetry?
Do you think in poetry? It's a really nice question. I think, I mean, it's very complicated. I think there can be times when something, you know, between the conscious and the unconscious mind, I think there can be moments when you might see something like the light shaking on a lake, and somehow it presents itself to you as an image in some way, you know. But I don't think you kind of think in poetic lines, kind of thing, you know. So.
Faber. And for both of you, what was it like working with Lavinia, and you work with Neil on Bloodaxe? What was it like working with your editor?
Well, Neil is here.
Neil gets a live review.
I think it's the belief of the editor. I mean, you know, Neil's kind of belief in what was essentially quite an unusual book, and the kind of conviction that the editor will bring to you that you're bringing to them. That's the most important thing, I think, of all, really, you know. We also had a live online launch where 3 Bloodaxe poets kind of debuted their things together, and Neil kind of chaired that with very specific questions, bringing the books together, but also talking to us, and that was really helpful as well. So really great. Yeah, really great.
Thank you, and let's give a round of applause for